Everyone up for Scott Albro. Let's go.
Thanks, everyone. It's great to be back working with Craig. It's been a while. Craig and I started a company called Topo together, and it was a great company. And I actually have some special visitors today. I'm just noticing that my wife and oldest daughter are here today, so thank you. That means there will be a 360-degree review tonight, no doubt. But anyway, it's great to be here. I wanted to talk about the rise of the go-to-market founder. I think one of the key takeaways from today is basically there is a ton of innovation in go-to-market organizations today, and the pace of change is really unprecedented. And so one of the things I look for when I see that much change is like, where is this change originating? And in my opinion, most of the innovation that we're seeing in go-to-market orgs today is actually coming from startups and specifically founders of those startups, okay? And so I've spent a lot of time trying to understand basically what these founders are doing. And I wanted to share 5 things that they're doing that I think are really innovative and can hopefully help all of you, okay? The other thing I did was I had ChatGPT help me build this presentation, and I basically kind of gave it my talk track and outline, and it clearly went to like a very dark place. There's like magic and sticks of dynamite, and there's this weird demented snowman down in the lower right-hand corner. And I actually think it didn't get it too wrong. It's not dark, but like there is a lot of change. So what's causing this change? I basically believe there are a couple interesting things happening in the world of go-to-market. One, I think most people have seen this chart or a version of this chart, which is basically companies are going from 0 to 100 million in ARR faster than ever. And we've basically destroyed that old model we all used to talk about, which was something like there were different versions of this, but like T3D3. T3D3 was basically this idea you would triple ARR for every year for 3 years, and then you would double ARR every year for 3 years. And if you did that, you would be a successful SaaS company. Well, the new model is basically just how fast can you get from 0 to 100 million in ARR. And you can see companies are doing it in 2 years. And by the way, not just AI companies, different types of companies. So that's one thing I think go-to-market founders are seeing and saying, hey, if I'm going to replicate this, I can't necessarily run the old playbook that used to allow me to get to T3D3. I have to do something that's like really innovative and really new. Okay, so that's one thing I think people are noticing. The other thing that people are noticing is that products are declining in status because of AI, and go-to-market is rising in status because of AI. And I think most people are familiar with this as well. Basically, AI is, quote, commoditizing technology products. I think that's a gross oversimplification, but it is something that's happening. On our CMO panel, you heard Sydney talk about, the number of new categories and vendors that were being created on G2 every year, right? That's an example of tech products being commoditized by AI. The other thing that's happening, though, is go-to-market is increasing in status because of that, right? So we've heard people talk about brand and being operationally efficient in the go-to-market organization. That means go-to-market is rising in status, again, because of AI. We can just do things in our go-to-market organizations that we couldn't do a few years ago. So I think smart founders are looking at these dynamics, faster growth, and then sort of products declining in status, go-to-market rising in status, and they're really starting to rethink how they go to market. I call this the go-to-market reset, right? Where basically the best startups are kind of rebuilding their go-to-market functions from the ground up using really unconstrained first principle thinking, okay? The best people to lead this go-to-market reset is the founder. You don't literally have to be the founder, but you kind of have to have this founder mindset. And the way I think of it is like, do you have a founder inside of your startup that obsesses over go-to-market just as much as they obsess over product? That's kind of how I think of the go-to-market founder, okay? So, how many people are familiar with like the Paul Graham Founder Mode essay? I think a lot of people probably are, right? If you haven't read that essay, it's a really good essay. You can just Google Founder Mode and you'll find it. And basically, the reason the founder, I think, is best suited to do a reset on go-to-market efforts is that founders can do things that other people can't. And when it comes to like a go-to-market function, the three things that a founder can do that I think they do better than anyone else is they can understand their customers and market, right? I mean, that's kind of why they started the business, right? They have these deeply held beliefs about what their customers want, market dynamics, et cetera. They are at liberty inside of an organization to think in a really unconstrained way. Most people inside of a company can't think as freely as a founder can. You may disagree with that, like the principle of that, but that is true, right? And then the third thing that founders can do better than anyone else is they can connect with customers and prospects and people like that better than anyone else can, okay? And so just think tactically about, you get one of those annoying LinkedIn messages, right? You get that from an SDR versus a founder. Founder has, I don't know how much higher the conversion rates are on that, but a lot higher, right? The founder can say things to the prospect and customer that the SDR can't, right? They can make commitments on behalf of the company in real time on that call, right? So these are like distinct advantages that founders have when they own the go-to-market function. They can just do things that other people can't. And this sort of go-to-market founder mindset or founder mode for go-to-market, whatever you want to call it, allows them to do things that other people can't inside of the go-to-market organization. When I look at sort of the interesting things that founders are doing, I come up with 5 different things. One is they tell really great stories. 2 is they invest in the founder brand. I actually don't like that term anymore. I think we've absolutely corrupted the notion of like what a founder brand should really be. We'll talk about that. They burn the old playbooks. They don't just like optimize and tweak around the edges. They're actually building their playbooks from the ground up. They make lots of growth bets. I think like 5 years ago, we called these things growth hacks or whatever. But you're just like constantly experimenting on growth bets. And then they become the best sales rep in their company, okay? And so I'd like to share some specific examples of each one of these 5 things. And let's go ahead and start with telling great stories. So these are also GPT images, obviously. And this one's a happy one, so that's good. Telling great stories as a startup is so important. It's sort of, I think of it as like the tide that lifts all boats. Like you can run the world's best demand gen campaign or whatever, send the best emails or whatever it is. If you don't have great stories that sort of underpin those different sales and marketing tactics, those things don't matter. And the reason is like great stories have this like uncanny ability to attract customers and more strategically reshape markets to your advantage, right? So like Mark Benioff in the early days of Salesforce, that's what he was just telling this amazing story about the death of software or traditional software, right? And he was able to run these great sales and marketing tactics on top of that story, right? So your founder story, when you think about these things, you need them to be super customer focused, relevant to the customer. In an ideal world, you're able to share a secret as part of the story, and you want that secret to be like a future that only you can see, right? So think of that as a secret or alpha or whatever you want to call it. Your story should hopefully become a movement that's much bigger than you. At Topo, the secret to that business was we were a research advisory business like Gartner, but we focused on sales and marketing. We just hitched ourselves to this wagon that was way bigger than we were. First, it was sales development, then it was account-based, right? It was like a movement these were movements that were happening that we chose to participate in and own to a certain extent. The best stories are ones where the founder is uniquely qualified to tell that story. Like, I know Aaron from Box, like he's telling lots of stories about AI agents, and it comes across as like incredibly authentic and genuine, which is great. The other thing you want to do is you want to tell stories that allow you to be your authentic self. And so I promised some examples for each one of these things. My favorite story that has been told over the last several years is the founder story at ServiceTitan. How many people are familiar with the ServiceTitan business? It's like this incredible SaaS business. They're now publicly traded. It was started by two co-founders who basically built this software application for their dads who worked in the trades, like the people who come, fix your plumbing or HVAC at your business or whatever it is, right? And they had these stories from growing up where they remembered their dads were in the field doing the work, and then they'd have to come home and manually fill out invoices and things like that, or schedule tomorrow's appointments, and they remembered how hard that was for their dad. And so this story just nails everything, right? It's like customer pain, transformation, and then it's deeply personal, right? And so when you go talk to people in the trades about ServiceTitan, they just love this company. They know it was built for them. It's very authentic and genuine in that way. And so one tip on just how to tell great stories is, as a startup, in my opinion, there are three different story types you can focus on. One is like a customer story, right? And that typically involves understanding a problem or priority that the customer has, and then offering help around that problem or priority. And if you think that means I'm going to give my demo, that's not necessarily the case. That can be, right? But you can also share best practices and content and data and so forth, or just offer advice, right? So that's a great customer story. The second type of story is what I call a transformation story, where you're basically going to transform, an industry, a role, whatever it is, from something old to something new, right? And this is where you have this clear, uncommon vision of the future. Maybe there's some technology magic that happens there. That's a lot of what we're seeing with AI right now. You offer guidance on how to navigate this transformation. And then you show people they're going to be winners and losers. You can either come along for this journey and win, or you can stay behind and lose, right? That's what I think of as a transformation story. And then the other thing is just making it personal, right? Telling people why you started the company. Again, ServiceTitan just kind of nails all three of these things, and I think that's why it's such a compelling story. And you can combine these three things. You don't have to treat these things as three different story types. The best stories kind of combine all three of these things. Okay, so that's one thing that the best go-to-market founders are doing, is they're able to tell these really compelling stories. The second thing is the best founders are investing in founder brand. And again, I feel like we've corrupted this term. The best founder brands start with a great story, but I'm actually, this is not as good of a soundbite, but I like this phrase that I read about the other week. It's called nonfiction marketing. That was coined by Yvon Chouinard, who was the founder and CEO of Patagonia. And Patagonia, obviously a very successful company, an incredible brand that was basically built on just real people using those products in real life. And so anyway, I made an oath to myself to stop using the term founder brand, because I think there are a whole bunch of things that people are doing here that you don't want to do. And so when I think about the most powerful founder brands, right, it's very human first, human centric, obviously. Publication frequency matters here, figuring out how to publish enough content as a founder is kind of the number one roadblock here, but it does matter. And you need to put your customer and market first rather than yourself. And so those are super important rules here. The things that I see happening in the market that sort of don't follow this is I see a lot of founders putting themselves first now, right? It's sort of become an exercise in self-promotion as opposed to being about the customer. I see a lot of what I call substantive slop, right? So you've heard of AI slop, you can kind of pick that out. Like some of these posts you see on marketing or on LinkedIn by founders, right? It's just this endless stream of what looks at the surface level to be really valuable, but actually really isn't. And so there are just these kind of worst practices out here that I'd be careful about when you invest in the founder brand or nonfiction marketing. So let's look at an example of someone who I think is doing it really well. Okay, now someone earlier criticized the Vercel billboard, which I understand, but I want to talk about what Guillermo does to basically build the founder brand. So this is, how many people are familiar with Vercel? It's one of these AI tools that allows you to kind of go from idea to app or product pretty quickly. Their V0 product. And the reason I like what Guillermo's doing on the founder brand is he clearly understands what his target market cares about. And his target market, at least historically, has been developers. And so Guillermo, for me, is like nonfiction marketing personified. This guy is a developer's developer. And if you understand sort of what developers think about, in my mind, they really value a couple things. One is like deep technical chops, and this is a little hard to see, but this is sort of on the right, like Guillermo's list of development accomplishments. And two is they really value, are you contributing to something bigger than you are? And where you see that in the developer world is primarily in the world of open source software. And so Guillermo's been a contributor to open source software. He's also contributed to some, this is like instant credibility with his target market, and he's not afraid to talk about it, okay? So I love this example. One of the things about the founder brand is that it can be hard to go execute on. This is a framework that I put together to help some founders do that. It does start with that first point, the story. Like, don't try to build a founder brand unless you have compelling stories to tell. And then the second thing is you need to manifest those stories, typically in the form of content. Content takes different forms. You can post on LinkedIn, Twitter, X. You can go on podcasts, all that type of stuff. This is typically where this effort breaks down because publishing frequency really matters in the world of building a brand. And you want to be publishing 3 to 4 times a week. And so my recommendation there for people is to figure out what's the easiest way for you to publish content. So on my iPhone, I used to have like the voice memo utility buried like 4 screens back from the homepage. Now it's on my first home screen, and I leave myself voice memos all the time, and then I turn those into text using an AI tool, and then I edit it. And that's just the easiest way for me to create content. And you need to find that for yourself as a founder, right? Distribution, that's pretty easy. That's just like meet your users where they are. If they're on LinkedIn, great. If they're on X, great, right? There are different places you can meet your users, okay? Monetization is don't be afraid to use your founder brand and the content you're creating to actually put someone into a commercial conversation. And like the classic trick here is, oh yeah, I was posting on LinkedIn, someone comments that's kind of relevant to my post or what we offer as a product. I might send them a DM that says like, hey, would you be open to giving us feedback on the product? And then if that call goes well, I might flip them into some type of commercial conversation, right? Super easy thing. By the way, that feedback conversation, we'll talk about that in a second, that's something only a founder can do, right? An SDR can't prospect and ask for feedback on a product. I mean, I guess they could. It's just hard to believe that that would work. So that's the second thing. The third, okay, GPT's getting angry again. The third thing is new playbooks. So I think those first two things, like people have been talking about, right? Like great stories and founder brands. I think one of the more like shocking, radical things that is happening is there are founders out there who are basically ripping up the old playbooks and building new ones. And so this is almost like a mindset thing, right? The most important thing here is, as a founder or go-to-market executive, you just have to be willing to question everything. You have to be able to break that way of thinking that I think is very prevalent in go-to-market orgs, which is like, well, this is the playbook. This is just the way we do it. You just have to be willing to question that and say, why? And so now, the other thing that helps with this is like, I think a lot of people, when they see like, well, new playbooks, they think, oh, I have to take this top-down approach to that. That's really hard to do, right? So I recommend starting with specific points in your revenue process that you feel like can be rebuilt and optimized. A couple other things here. You can choose to automate these non-core menial tasks like, oh, how do we help the sales rep update the CRM? That's worth doing for sure, but that's super tactical. That only yields so much benefit. What's more interesting are the people who are scaling higher value activities that don't scale without AI, okay? And this is kind of one of the coolest things that I've seen in a go-to-market org recently. So David Boscovich, who's here, raise your hand, David, Flatfile, data migration platform, highly recommend it. Wish I had it at my old companies, very cool. He has basically reinvented how they think about prospecting into certain markets. And David's got the right mindset for this. It's basically question everything and focus on first principles. And so the first thing that David questioned was like, well, how do I think about a target market? And David came up with this concept of micro segments, right? So instead of targeting the software industry, I'm going to target software companies that do field services software, right? And then he goes really, really deep on that micro segment. And he's actually built this amazing application that someone should build and make a lot of money selling. This is an internal tool that David's built for their own internal sales and marketing organization that basically is representative of this approach that they now take to prospecting. Super cool. This is like question everything. Like, why do we target at this level of the vertical industry? Why don't we generate these 50-page reports on each one of these micro segments that we go after, and then basically pull content that we can use for prospecting out of those reports that would impress the CEO and board of directors at a field services software company. Very cool stuff. Okay, so how to redesign your playbook. Again, I think one of the most important things here is to focus on specific activities. And so imagine this is like a grossly oversimplified revenue process at the top. On the left here, we've got this really simple example, which is, hey, my sales reps used to have to enter data into the CRM manually. Maybe I can automate that with AI, and there are a bunch of tools that do allow you to do that. What's more interesting is when you think about like these more substantive customer interactions. And here's an example from an enterprise sales cycle where there's a company that does these key stakeholder workshops to try and drive consensus around the adoption of their enterprise application. It used to be that a sales rep would need to do these pre-workshop calls with anywhere from like 5 to 10 people who were going to be in the workshop. Each one of those pre-workshop calls took 30 minutes. Well, they built this voice AI voice agent that essentially does pre-workshop discovery with each one of the key stakeholders. And they send it via email, they put it in the calendar invite, and they say, when you have a minute, will you just call this voice AI agent? It's going to ask you a bunch of questions. They end up with dozens of pages of pre-workshop materials that they can query, they can surface anticipated objections from. So this is the type of unconstrained thinking that's happening in some go-to-market organizations today. Okay, number 4. Growth bets. This is a really fun one. So just constant founder-led go-to-market experimentation. Like if you had to think about this, it's like bringing vibe coding into your go-to-market organization, right? And so there's some rules for this, right? It's like just having this brainstorming / just launch mindset is super important. I think making these growth bets like either really human or technically magical or both ideally is great. Certainly putting your product inside of these growth bets is important, so you actually put the product in the customer's hands. Creative, entertaining, fun, shareable, rapid time to value, and then just double down on your winners because you want to do a lot of these. So this is Lovable. Lovable is, again, another one of these like idea to app or idea to product tools. And basically one of the co-founders there has kind of taken go-to-market ownership, and he just spends a ton of time thinking about different bets that they're going to make in the go-to-market organization. And the full list of bets that they've made in the last 90 days is like, there are like 20 of them. These are just some of the kind of more interesting, fun ones, right? Like this linkable thing is you can give Lovable your LinkedIn URL, your profile URL, and it'll build you your own personal website. Kind of cool, right? My favorite one is they had a Lovable design battle where some 19-year-old named Enrique basically had a design battle with a designer who had 10 plus years of experience. They live streamed this thing in front of 40,000 viewers, and they ended up getting 3 million total views at the end of the day. So, and that's just one example. I think someone earlier showed an example of like the launch video, I think, and it got like 7 million views. This stuff is happening. You just have to like be constantly experimenting with it, okay? By the way, AI products just lend themselves to this because they still come across as like magic. That window won't always be open for us, right? Eventually these AI products will just say, well, of course it doesn't, you know? But right now we live in this time where like if you're not making these growth bets that are like expose the magic of your product, you're making a mistake. A little tool here on how to do this. I mean, it's almost like you take a content marketing approach to building product, right? You're just constantly trying to come up with different ideas. You vibe code those ideas, you get them out into the wild, you see what works. Okay, and then the final point is top sales rep. I actually think a lot of founders do this now, which is basically like, how do you as the founder become the top rep in your company? This is something that Craig taught me how to do at Topo. It's basically like you set a weekly meeting target for every founder. And it's a first meeting with a prospect in your ICP, right? You don't count the second and third meetings, that type of stuff. So you need a weekly meeting target. You spend a lot of time on networking, and you're not shy about it, right? That person who tells you, yeah, I'm not interested. Well, who else should I know? You know, can you connect me with anyone else, right? Like basic networking 101, but you need that kind of aggressive mindset mentality. Earlier, I talked about the founder feedback meeting, right? That's a killer offer for a founder to be able to use. You know, hey, this is not a demo. This is not a sales call. I want your feedback on what we're building. That drives super high connect rates. You want to focus on executive level two-way conversations. So this is not a demo mill, right? This is like we're trying to build a relationship and establish trust, and we'd like to be partners with you. The big bottleneck here is post-meeting follow-up. So lots of people can schedule lots of meetings. The question is, how do you follow up on all of them? That's a key thing to focus on. And then you want to lay the foundation for sales hiring. You're trying to learn as you do this, so when you build your own go-to-market organization, you can onboard reps onto a platform that allows them to be successful. Okay, so let's talk about Kenan. Does anyone know who Kenan is? All right, cool. So somewhat of a controversial figure. But one thing he did do really well is he was able to fill his calendar with literally thousands of demos. And it was sort of relentless founder branding and go-to-market bets that allowed him to do this, okay? And so this is great. He was really focused on like achieving, this is actually his calendar, and this is his tweet where he says, my body is breaking down from all of this. I'm working 24/7. You might want to hire someone. But anyway, so he was relentlessly focused on this weekly demo number. He was obviously very successful with it. Just some words of caution here, right? Again, this is not just about giving the demo. This is about building a relationship, getting feedback on your product, making sure that you've established some trust with these prospects. These prospect conversations for an early stage company are the most valuable currency that you have, right? And so if you blow them, you've made a big mistake, right? And I would just say, like, you want to be able to hang up from your sales calls believing that you established more trust than when you started the call, okay? So focus on deep two-way conversations. It's also really hard to build trust when you're having this many conversations. It's hard to pay attention to every single customer, understand what they're telling you, understand what they want from you, right? And it's also really hard to follow up with them. And this is, like scheduling meetings is one thing, but following up on them, in my experience, is usually the bottleneck on a sales process. The call may take 30 to 60 minutes, but how you follow up may take hours, right? And so that's usually where things break down. So there are different ways to think about that, right? But I think there's this mini sales process that a founder can run, right? Which is, think of it as networking, right? What we were talking about earlier around networking. There's some best practices there. Think about running what you might call a disco demo meeting. So you conduct discovery, you give the demo, but actually the most important part of that meeting is either during or after the demo, you're getting feedback from the customer. Like customer feedback is a key theme here. And then the third step is you want to aim for like super prompt, relevant follow-up at the end of the call. And typically you want to try and follow up within 24 to 48 hours. Anything longer than that, you're actually eroding trust with the prospect. And kind of the only way to do that for a founder is you have to refine your revenue process to the point where you have like a standard package or set of packages that you can follow up with, right? And so I'm going to go pull this documentation or craft this type of proposal or whatever it is, and I'm going to be able to get that back to the buyer in 24 to 48 hours, okay? So those are the 5 things that the best go-to-market founders do. They tell great stories, the founder brand, or nonfiction marketing. They burn the old playbooks, they make lots of growth bets, and they become the top sales reps. And I didn't have time to like draw this slide, but like one of the cool things is all these things sort of intersect with each other, right? Like these are 5 pillars of a startup's go-to-market function that's going to work. All right, I think I'm out of time. I will be hanging out afterwards and able to answer any questions, but just want to thank everyone for their attention. Thanks.